Hi, I'm John, and welcome back to Dice Paper Miniatures. In today's episode, you'll see my reaction to the new Warhammer Preview, Lords of the Mortal Realms. Yeah! This is the Warhammer Preview online from this last weekend on February 20th, specifically for the Lords of the Mortal Realms. Now, for those of you that may not be aware, typically on these previews, they do a mix of 40K and a mix of fantasy. But for this preview, we're looking specifically just at fantasy. They decided to split the two categories apart for their previews. As I understand it, that's to be moving forward, but they may change that depending on the reaction they get from having exclusively just one category versus having a mix. So pretty standard stuff on the intro. We have your Warhammer Age of Sigmar, Warhammer Underworlds, and then Warhammer Quest. Those are all the different product lines, if you will, that are going to be covered in this preview today. So we have the introduction video. It's already on autoplay, but they're talking about their reaction to the releases and giving a little bit more behind the scenes. Those are always fun to listen to. Sometimes I just have those play in the background, but we're moving forward. So the first thing we'll look at are the new models for basically the Lumineth. A number of new models, some new terrain pieces, and a new codex as well. So let's go ahead and look at the video preview. Go ahead and start that. So yeah, these models are very well done technically, I think. There's consistency across all the design aesthetics, from everything from the mounted units to the foot soldiers, right, to some of their demigods, if you will. We see character models for those. If you're into this aesthetic, these are spectacular, really well done. I'll go into more detail over my actual thoughts on what I think the aesthetic, the inspiration for their aesthetic.
Favored of my twin, you set new heights for all Lumineth to aspire to. My
Very
people,
cool.
with your combined might, judgment will be rendered.
That is a
Together,
massive banner.
we will pierce death's fell curtain and bring light.
All right. So, of course, they have a number of different previews for all the different models. So, my initial reaction on these new models, again, I think technically they're well done. I think they're consistent across all the different design elements. Not so many cow heads for helmets this time around, but I think the general theme is massive headgear, massive banners. I think like what's the inspiration for this aesthetic? What do I think it is? I guess I should say specifically. I think if you were a kid in the late 70s or early 80s, or if your grandmother the last time she decorated her home was in the 70s or 80s, the coloring, which again, you could change that easily, but like the ornamentation on the helms in particular has a very like lampshade lamp. I think there's also like some porcelain that's kind of an aesthetic they use with the creams and the blues. But as a kid, I feel like the inspiration for this was like my grandma's home. It's got some of that 70s like ornamentation. It's got some tassels, some feathery plume kind of look to it. Again, the helmets are ginormous, which if you're into that aesthetic, rock on. I think it's cool if this is your jam. But yeah, I feel like if you went into your grandma's home or like a 70s thrift store, everything from like lampshades, lamps, vases, the metalwork feels very 70s to me, which is, I mean, why not? If my grandma was a Age of Sigmar player, this would be her army for sure. All right. So great poses overall. Not overly complicated for these models. They look dynamic enough though. So, all right. Now, the Venari Star Shard Ballistas. This giant quiver. Size matters apparently when you're an elf. But again, giant headwear, giant backpacks. We'll see. The one thing that I think is interesting, we'll come to it here in a minute, is their mounts. The proportions like do a flip flop, and I'll explain what I mean by that here in a minute. But I actually like these helmets quite a bit. They kind of have like a seafarer, I don't know, Victorian age British helm quality going on. I do dig the look of these, but yeah, this is definitely kind of that lampshade body of like a porcelain glass lamp. And the colors just add to that aesthetic too, that kind of cream or off-white, the blues, very, very porcelain looking. Even like they almost look like hookahs in a way, but these things in the ground, I guess maybe they're lights. I'm not exactly sure what they're supposed to be, but they're interesting ornamentation for sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's consistent, right? Terrain pieces, there seems to be a real love-hate with these. Like I like having this customized look for your battlefield, right? To have out there. But as I understand it, they don't cost any points and they give your armies an advantage. It is what it is. But visually, I think it's well done. It seems to be consistent with the overall theme of the army itself. And I like how they play with negative space, how they play with things looking like they're floating, especially with this particular army. So it's cool. Again, not necessarily an army for me, but it's consistent and I dig it. All right, so this is what I meant about the proportions seem to flip-flop when it comes to their animals or their mounts. So the figures have these massive helmets, they have large weapons, maybe a massive banner we'll see here in a moment, or like an effect where they're flying or floating off. Those things are all huge, but when it comes to their mounts, it's like role reversal. The heads on the mounts seem disproportionately small to me. Like this is a cool mount, like this model. I know a lot of people like this model. I like it too. It's a well done model. It's just interesting that I feel like the head is about 80% to the size it should be. It's like it could be another 10 or 20% larger to fit the proportions of not only the model, but I also feel like because everything else is kind of disproportioned as far as the headgear goes, I feel like that they could have done more with that. Maybe not as much ornamentation. So the amount of ornamentation the mount has is pretty spot on, but it feels a little small in respects to how they treated the rest of the figures in the line. Again, I know a lot of folks like this. I think it's solid. It's not perfect, but it is. Technically these things are amazing. But stylistically it's a little wonky. Now, this is an interesting way of getting two models for the price of one, I guess. I guess you could split these up if the rules allow you to have these figures separate. I would definitely have these on separate bases just because. But if they work as a single unit, then obviously having them together, this is an interesting approach. I believe there's another Chaos model here recently, maybe for Slaanesh, that had a similar kind of trope where it was one model jumping over the other. That's cool. It's worth exploring these different arrangements and compositions. I like it. It's fresh. It's unique. Again, if these act as one unit, then cool. This is a fun way of addressing that. Again, massive headpieces, definitely that 70s, 80s grandma vibe going on with decor. That's what I was referring to. Like, again, whether it's a wall plaque of sorts, a picture frame, very gaudy picture frame, or like lampshades, like the elves are definitely, they got that groovy 70s vibe going on. Consistent for sure. But this model is awesome and ridiculous all at the same time. So, speaking of 70s, like those faux flame, they're electric lights, but they look like candles. And that's literally, I think, what's going on here. It's like the glass. It looks like it's shaped like a candle flame, but it's glass. It's got the lantern up here. So obviously more glassware. All that metal work that's very curvy and whimsical, totally 70s. The tassels, of course. you can almost argue there's a little bit of an Asian inspiration going on, or Middle Eastern vibe, whether it's, yeah, kind of like a hookah shoes. Again, consistent, looks cool. The Harry Potter homage with like the wand poking into papers like he's reading a spell. It's clever. It's interesting. Wonder another kind of trope that you get from like anime, like whenever there's combat in an anime, right? They declare the move they're going to do, so they yell out, cat claw strike, right? And whatever, then they do the move. And I feel like that symbol on the top of his helmet, where it's like characters written on the helmet, it makes me wonder, does that change based on whatever spell he's casting? I mean, obviously it can't in the plastic, but like thematically, like within the setting, is that a character representing what move or spell he's going to do? I know it's probably not, but in my mind, that's what I first went to. Like another like kind of weird little 70s like trope, that they kind of pull from anime. So I just think that's funny. Or just like his name, like, hi, I'm Bob. I'm Bob the Wizard here to, poke papers and ruin your day. You need a light. There's so much going on. It's fun to look at, but it's yeah. Yeah. Okay, we're just going to move on. Speaking of 70s anime, we have Goku riding his cloud, so that's cool. But that's not Goku, or is it? Yeah. Again, consistency. If you're going to commit to a theme, you definitely committed hard to it, and I applaud you for that. It's like your cloud has weird tails or stretchy taffy legs. I don't know. I understand this is just to keep the cloud floating. It makes me wonder if you could have like had that bonsai tree, I guess another kind of Asian theme or Japanese theme specifically. Maybe you could have had that a little bit taller and had the cloud coming off of that. There's probably a lot of different ways this could have been handled. This isn't a bad way. I think the motion stream coming off the cloud on the rear was maybe unnecessary. Like most of the cloud isn't swooshing by so dramatically, except for that one little piece. I don't know if I buy that. If I were to buy this model, I might like shave that portion off, but that would be me. But again, giant headwear. It's got speaking of that kind of Asian or Japanese vibe, the staff has like that fan pattern that comes off. Again, this is straight out of my grandma's home. Like, I kid you not, like all the decorations she'd be digging right now. Massive banner. You pray there's no wind, because if there is, you just lost your standard bearer. Like he's left the battlefield. Whoosh. But I mean, maybe it's counterbalanced by his head. So I guess if the banner is like, if the wind grabs the banner and he holds on, can he steer his flight with his headgear? Maybe. Maybe it's like a rudder. That could explain a lot. Maybe that's why they have the headwear. It's to steer them as they're flying because of, all the wind and yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I really, really like this, but it, again, literally and figuratively, over the top. Oh man, oh man. And then we have the Lamborghini model, the Huracan, tomato. It's interesting that they have a lot of cow references in their armor, but their demigod's a fox. Why isn't it a cow or a bull or I don't know, any naturally horned animal? But it's a fox. It's cool. I don't understand why it's a fox, but it's a fox. I do like the use of the negative space on this model. I spoke to this in one of my previous live streams when this model was previewed. I think it was last week, I believe. It's unnecessary, but I applaud them for, again, you committed to it, and it's cool. I think the real challenge with making these like this tornado, when you actually have a real cyclone or a real tornado, right? It's mostly air. It's mostly translucent. There's some debris in that rotation. That's really hard to have a translucent rotation when it's, a colored plastic. And then you have to paint it, of course, to try to maybe match the landscape or the terrain of whatever spinning up. It works, but I think it's because they're committing to these things. Maybe this interpretation isn't the best, but it's going to lead to that next thing where I think they just get better and better at it. Maybe I know they kind of went away from this with the recent Necron models that were released with the warriors, where it used to be the guns had like that green translucent plastic tubes, but as hobbyists we all paint that anyway. So this time around when they released the new warriors, they didn't have that clear green plastic bit anymore. It's just the standard plastic like everything else on the sprue, and of course you'll paint it as you wish. So I can understand they're like, we're not going to do a clear plastic for this hurricane. There could have been an argument made for that. But that being said, it makes sense that they kept with just the standard plastic for sure. Again, I don't know why it's a fox. Everything else is like a cow or a bull. Maybe a goat or a ram could be in there. But a fox? Okay. So that's it for those models. And now we have this basically, I know I said codex, but battle tome. As I understand it, this is fairly the content similar to an existing one, so that could rub some folks the wrong way. But in any event, you have a battle tome that looks like it matches your army now. Grandma's headgear and all. So we got some lampshade action here, some more lampshade action in the background. Lots of 70s. Yeah. Groovy. But again, overall, very consistent, very consistent. And so that's it for the Lumineth. So if you're a Lumineth player and you really like this aesthetic, I don't see how you can't not. I don't see how you cannot pick this up. So yeah, it's very awesome. All right, so this was interesting. So this was just like, here's a new Night Haunt model, I guess. Let's take a look at the model and we'll come back to the video. Yeah, this is a pretty rad model. It was a little difficult to tell the way this, they always, let me back up. GW puts a lot of time into painting their models for these previews, right? And they have really, I think, quality photography for their models. But sometimes the angles are a little weird. And by that, I mean this elongated helmet that this Night Haunt model has. The angle that we first see it in, it looks like there's a back portion that goes around his waist with like a torture type instrument hanging in the background, but it runs in with that elongated headwear. So when I first saw this model, it looked like the helmet went from way down all the way almost to the ground, but in reality it stops about his chest area or waist, if you will. And what's in the background is actually a totally separate element. It just happens to read visually, it looks like one long piece. Other than that, I mean, all these Night Haunt models for the most part are just ridiculously cool. They've really dialed in that use of negative space with the cloaks kind of fading off into tendrils, but then forming into a physical form as it goes up. But then they've kind of exaggerated it further by like stretching out the limbs, kind of a stylized rack on his back, which this aesthetic we'll see kind of ties into some of the Cursed City stuff that we'll see here in a little bit. But yeah, it's very solid design. We'll take a look at this video and see what this is all about.
Those who defy me will know only torment.
Yeah, he fits right into the rest of the army really well. You see, there's that elongated like torture device. So it's clearly a separate element. It's not part of the helmet. That was awesome for sure. So that was this is the Krulghast Cruciator. That is not easy to say. Krulghast Cruciator. I think that name's appropriate. I think I think you got that one dialed in. Now, I reviewed this, of course, this weekend. Uh, I wanted to have a little bit time to think about it. I also watched, of course, some other people's reaction videos. Out of everything we see in this preview, this is, on one hand, the coolest thing and the not so coolest thing. And what I mean by that, well, we'll come back to the video. I feel like what this model is for me is the coolest model I've seen in a while from GW that I will be buying. And I don't even play Stormcast. Maybe if they have rules for this and I can fit it into my war band for Warcry, I'll definitely use it for that. Otherwise, it'll just be a display piece. But it's a huge missed opportunity on just understanding, I think, how combat works in general, how your body moves, and what would be the preference in this scenario. So, what do I mean by all of that? Sounds very academic. Well, without seeing the video, we can see the art that he's got a sword in his right hand and hammer in his left. But whenever you reference a hammer, you always hammer down. Like, that's the term for hammering, is hammer down. Like, you always come down with the heaviest item. You see Marvel, movies or the comic books like Thor, whether it's in his right hand or left hand, you're always striking down with the heavy item. And I think that's where this should have, as an art director, and I'm a little bit biased because that's what I do on my day job some days. I would have suggested, hey, let's switch those weapons around. And then it allows for another really cool thing. So, for example, he's striking down with his hammer, right? It's the heaviest element. That's the most dramatic. Like, I feel like that has literally and figuratively, the most impact. I don't think striking down with the sword feels as dynamic and powerful. It feels a little awkward because I feel like you don't want to hit the ground or even remotely come close to hitting the ground with your sword. I mean, your initial, like, if you're fighting, like, I don't want to screw up my blade. Hammer, not so much. Hammer, if that thing hits the ground, cool, whatever. Boom, hits the ground. Now, the missed opportunity for that is, not only is it awkward in terms of balance, whether it's just combat or normal balance, he strikes with his hammer, but if he had his sword up, right? Literally upright. If the sword was up, especially upright, it would allow for a cool element like a lightning to surge through the blade. And so you could create, like, you would have it would look super cool with that hammering hitting down, some electricity maybe coming off that hammer, right? And then it connects with the sword hilt, and then a bolt of lightning, whether it's ascending up towards the sky or coming through the hammer, through the sword into the hammer and striking down. I feel like, okay, it's not in the model as it stands, but I think based on what I can see, I think that's fixable. So that will probably be something I explore. If you watched Vince and the guys from this weekend, he had, like, the VinnyCon. They talked about this too. It might have been Tom that mentioned it, that the weapon should have been reversed, but then Vince kind of respond to saying, I'll probably want to put some electricity or a lightning bolt. And he mentioned, like, holding a paper clip and using that as, like, the form for the lightning bolt. Sure, paper clip, florist wire, anything to give that rigid form, and then you can kind of do some putty work on there to kind of get some irregularities in the shape for that lightning bolt. All those different materials could work, whether it's you're using green stuff, milliput, or another type of epoxy putty. I think for lightning, because it has the potential of being thin and maybe brittle in areas, even with that paper clip or florist wire understructure, green stuff may be the route to go because it's a little forgiving and flexible, as opposed to when milliput hardens, a lot of times it's very brittle. So maybe either that, or you could do a 50-50 mix to do your lightning bolt effect. I believe Vince even mentioned he had a video on it, so definitely maybe check that out. I know when I go to do my conversion for this, I'll document that, and so that'll be a future episode. But I love this look, and I think I prefer him without the mask or the helmet. I think I like the open I typically like open faces, and sometimes they dial it in perfectly, sometimes they don't, but I do like the open helmet on this one. The hair could be a little bit more spiky and sporadic, closer to the illustration. And I understand that's probably why they molded or sculpted this the way they did, because the weapons are reversed, but for artistic license purposes, I would have switched them. Or when this was being illustrated, I would have requested that the hammer be the weapon coming down. Sorry if that offends anyone, but that's what I would have suggested. Let's go ahead and watch the video.
None shall question his faith.
Yeah, that lightning could
shall
be coming
stay
off the sword
his
like a
pulse.
lightning rod. And he could have been smashing the ground with the hammer. Other than that, this model is it's ridiculously well done. Super cool. Technically perfect. Very cool. All right, so, and that is a Gardus Steel Soul. Gardus. I'm not feeling it quite the same as the Krulghast, even though this is really hard to say, the Krulghast Cruciator. I like that name. Gardus, meh. It's okay. Now another hero or champion, if you will, is the Wight King. Now, funny enough, they were showing what the original sculpt of this looked like from the 80s. I definitely remember this model from back then. This is by far way, way better. Yeah, this is, for me, of all the models so far that we've seen, with the exception of the hammer sword being switched around, that was my favorite model so far. But overall, this is probably by far and away the coolest one. I love the throwback to some of the original 80 design, that shields specifically. So cool. This has like heavy metal written all over it. Like, this is just a badass design. Very, very cool. Let's take a look at that video. I dig it. Grave digging it. A grave danger, even better. I love the puns. Can't lie. I live for bad puns. So good. So good. The Wight King. Wow. Coming soon to a crypt near you. Reserve yours today. You probably should, because this will probably sell out. All right, so I don't have a bone to pick with this model. Everything about it I dig. So good. It's like, I feel like every now and then you get like the GW you remember, not to take away from any of the new designs, because technically, even if you aren't into the 70s lampshade Japanese fan cloud Goku flying theme, those are technically perfect and well done. But this aesthetic, this speaks to me. This is like, from the GW you remember, Wight King. Yeah, anyways, it's very cool. Yeah, I don't play this army at all, but this might be a piece to get for display for sure, as well as potential conversions. Yeah, this, for me, this, like, I can't stress how much like nostalgia this model provides me. It's so good. All right, so we've left Age of Sigmar. Now we're going into Warhammer Underworlds, and this is probably by far one of the cooler warbands, especially for Direchasm for Warhammer Underworlds. So we have Hedkrakka's Madmob. So we'll look at the video here in a minute, but we gotta go the models first. That's just standard procedure here. Dudes, this is so cool. I have to admit, I'm very picky about a lot of things, but I never quite picked up on feet not having toenails. So I think that was Tom or Vince that mentioned that. So thanks, fellas, because now I can't not see that. So I don't know why they don't have toenails. I mean, they're not humans, but they have fingernails or claws. Like, do I really have to spend time like sculpting toenails? That just doesn't seem right. And why would you leave them off? Like, the studio's clearly talented in designing all sorts of intricate details. Is there like, does someone just like have a real like anti-feet toe thing where they, nope, not doing it? Or were they there and the painters are like, I won't paint toenails. Like, I won't do it. Even though they painted the claw fingernails, I'm not going to paint toenails. So they like shave them off and just paint it skin color. I don't know. It's such it's an interesting choice as to why they don't have toenails. Other than that, I mean, this model in particular is really cool. Obviously, there's not going to be a bowstring, but that's easily remedied if you feel the need to. Thin fluorescent wire, just paste it right in there. Not a big deal. Or not at all if you're not really worried about it. It's up to you. So this is Hedkrakka's, and that mask is the bomb. It's hilarious that it's an orc wearing a mask with an abstraction of an orc face. It's ridiculous, but it's cool. Again, no toenails. Okay. It is what it is. The paint schemes on these are great. I do feel at times there's the GW paint style works really well for 40K and for like mechanical objects. When it comes to organic shapes, it has a tendency to make the organic shapes feel more angular than they really are in the sculpt. It just is what it is, but it sometimes is misleading. Sometimes I feel like the figures are they're not as organic as they should be, or too angular. They look stiff or chiseled. But then when you get the actual model unpainted, a lot of that that's a lot of that's in the paint, not so much in the sculpt. So for what that's worth. But this is a very sweet model. I feel like they're using more feathers in this Savage Orcs grouping, this warband, than like other iterations of the Savage Orcs, but I think it works. This is the Wolverine inspired orc, the Wolverorc, the Orctine. Pick your poison on that one. Yeah, this one is this is arguably one of my all-time favorite sculpts, at least for the orcs. Definitely for the Savage Orcs. This is just awesome. The details are great. I love that that skull being suspended between the two tusks or horns, if you will. Yeah, fantastic. And yeah, the paint job looks great. Again, you notice it kind of like around the knees and the upper, like the quads, the legs, where it's like the painter, the style of paintwork makes it seem more chiseled than the plastic probably is. Again, that's an stylistic aesthetic. Either you like it or you don't. But I think the sculpt itself is fantastic, and the overall paint job is really well done for this model. All right, so I thought it was funny. I think Vince, again, those guys reference this as like the Flintstone Savage Orc, and I totally get that. Like it it definitely has the Flintstone style, like onesie, if you will. Yeah, the Flintstone onesie. Kind of a dress, kind of not. Just kind of an oversized shirt, but kind of not. I don't know if there's a way of getting around that for not looking like a Flintstone onesie, but it's a Flintstone onesie. Yep, no toenails. And this is one of those ones, again, I talked earlier about amazing sculpts and paint jobs, and the photography as far as like the lighting is great, but the perspective, like I wish this model was slightly rotated, because everything seems like the foreshortening and everything just feels like everything's like squished flat, and I know it's not. In fact, it's probably leaning forward quite a bit. So there's probably a lot of depth and dimension to this. It's just you're not seeing it just because of this one angle. But yeah, anyways, it looks like they painted one of the teeth to be gold. That's funny. Sure, why not? Flintstone onesies. I kind of would like a Flintstone onesie, I think. All right, we're back to the stringless bow and arrow. Okay, so let's watch the video for the Hedkrakka's mob, Madmob. Hopefully it's not blaring your speakers out. I did try to turn the volume like halfway on all of these. So good. I don't know if they're vampire good from last week's preview or 2 weeks ago, whenever it was now, but this is probably Kagras is pretty high up there on my favorite warband for this expansion, but definitely the vampires. These are probably tied with Kagras. So the Slaves to Darkness expansion and the Savage Oryx, I would say, are kind of tied. All right, so speaking of Warhammer Underworlds, this was an interesting decision. So they have a new starter set, even though they just came out with Direchasm. It makes me wonder if this was going to be a Barnes & Noble exclusive, kind of like Night Vault. Was it Night? No. There was a Night Vault version that was Barnes & Noble exclusive, but it wasn't Night Vault. Can't believe I can't remember the name of it now. But in any event, I feel like this might have been intended to be a Barnes & Noble exclusive, but it's not, from what I can tell. But it has your Stormcast Eternals, and it has your Night Haunts. And I didn't think these were going to be unique war bands, and that would be the only reason why to pick this up, I think, because it sounds like they are unique war bands. Let's see if it specifically says. 2 new war bands, Storm of Celestis and the Drapur Wraith Creepers. What's also interesting about this, it says that it's 2 pre-made decks. So I guess if you're new to the game and you don't want to have to think about building your own play deck, this would be the starter set to go with. Get this, learn how to play the game quickly, and then you can get the other stuff, of course, because that's what you do. I wish they had better pictures of the models themselves. Like, I wonder if I open this in a new tab, not natively, but I can, through the power of Google, I can zoom this in. Let's see if I can scroll it. So I don't think these are actually new models, though. I want to say those are like the Judicar crossbows. They're not like the bolt pistols. They're actually like the full-on crossbows. I feel like these models have been released before, but this is a new packaging. So it looks like you get 3 Stormcast Eternals and a Griffin, or Griffinhound, use my words. And it looks like you get 4 Night Haunts. I'm not sure. I don't play Night Haunts enough to know if these are all the same types. It looks like they're all the same type, which is interesting because Stormcasts are usually pretty pricey, and you typically only get 3 models in a Stormcast warband. This one has 4. Whereas Night Haunts, typically, I think, outnumber the Stormcast. They typically have more models. So either these are cheaper Stormcast models. I know the Griffhound is probably not that expensive, point cost wise. Or these particular Night Haunt models are pretty pricey from a point-wise perspective. Now the challenge is to get this back to a normal view size. All right, so that's it for that particular new item. This is interesting. I feel like this was meant to be a Barnes & Noble's exclusive, but it's not. All right, so probably, arguably, what we're all here for, this preview for today or this weekend, is the Warhammer Quest Curse City. So we'll come back to this video. If you watch, I believe it's Berserk. It's an anime and a manga where it's like black and white with a lot of red coloring added to it. And this, straight up, the art style looks right out of Berserk. So what that means for me is I already like it. We'll watch the video here in a minute. Again, we want to look at the models, like what's inside the box. Interesting composition for the box. From a story's perspective, I would assume this has to be one of the main characters, the main hero. Based on what we've seen for models, I'm pretending I haven't seen this model yet. So let's go ahead and take a look at the models, and then we'll come back and look at what's in the box and the video. So they do start right off the bat with this Brienne Tarth, Game of Thrones looking lead knight. It's a solid design. Is it the best one in the box? Probably not. Is it the one they should have led with on the box? I would say no, unless the story dictates that she's like if not one of the main characters. Like if this model, this character, gets the most screen time, if you will, within the story, sure, makes sense. She should be the lead on the box art. But if not, then I feel like there might be some other reasons as to that decision, which I don't want to really get into. I'm just looking at it from a pure, does it make sense to the story? Does it make sense to the game within that environment, if you will, to have her be the lead on the box? I wouldn't necessarily know if this is, male or female character, but I can tell it more in the model. Not that that matters, but for some folks it might matter. And I would like to, and I think, I shouldn't say I would like, I think it, and maybe it doesn't matter. That might just be being an old dude and having like preconceived stereotypes. But like I know because of Brienne Tarth from Game of Thrones, that's who I think this is referencing. If I didn't know about Brienne Tarth, if you were wanting to play a strong female character within Curse City, is this the character? I think like they joked about Monopoly on the Vince's show this weekend, and like, I want to be the shoe or I want to be the car. I always like to be in the car. Personally, I don't know what that says about me, but in any event, so I know like in other games, like some people want to play, the guy figure, the girl figure, whatever. I don't know. I don't want to get too hung up on this, but I don't even know if it matters. But if it did, this is it's a little obscure as to, unless you read the book and it specifically says, which I think if you go to the website, it will give you the name of all the characters and it'll be obvious if it's who it represents. Other than that, the stance, the pose, if you will, the giant eagle head, it's a cool looking model. I mean, again, it's one of those things where technically it's spot on. Is it my most favorite model in this bunch? No. This, my friends, is my favorite model. Not even a question. We'll see the rest of the models in the line here soon. And there's other models that are close to this one, but this is by far my favorite one. I'm biased. I'll be the first to admit. Every time I've played any like Warhammer fantasy game, whether tabletop game, role-playing game, video game, specifically Warhammer Age of Reckoning, Witch Hunter, Witch Hunter, Witch Hunter, Witch Hunter. What? Witch Hunter. Yes, every go-to character for me is an assassin class Witch Hunter or a sniper class like Witch Hunter. Same way with Star Wars, same way with like every game system. Assassins or snipers? Again, I don't know what that says about me. Those are the classes I play. If not, a tank. DPS tank. Haters gonna hate. But this sculpt design, bonkers. Again, going back to the painting decisions, the painting aesthetic we see for GW models, sometimes they approach it, a model, as if it's a robotic mechanical form. So everything kind of has a hard edge to it. It feels geometric in shapes, which is fine, especially for Space Marines or the Tau, etc. But when it's organic elements like a flowing cloak, a rounded glove, if you will, sometimes those edges are so defined, it feels like is that in the paint job? I can't tell, or is it in the sculpt? I think this is mostly in the sculpt. Excuse me, in the paint. It's in the paint job. So I don't, if you're a little concerned about it being too rigid in form in some areas, I think while it's painted well, that's just an aesthetic decision they have in house to do it that way for reasons. A sweet model. These are one of those models where they've never really done it for the previous Warhammer Quest stuff, but it would be nice if they would release all these character models individually at some point. Would be nice, because I'd want to paint this guy for multiple games. Like, I might want to do like just a tabletop quality for Warhammer Quest, but I may want to have this model for a display piece, maybe even painted differently, maybe some conversions if they have rules for them in Warcry. So I could easily justify like 2 or 3 copies of this model. Did I say copies? I meant separate purchased versions of this model. Yes, yes. Not printed or recast in any way whatsoever. Fully legit copies of that model. Now, this is just a fun model. There's no other way of putting it. Is he as good as the Witch Hunter? The short answer is no. The long answer is, if you play Army, this faction in Age of Sigmar, I mean, there could be an argument for that. He's a very cool, steampunky space dwarf pirate. All those words together really don't make sense until you see this model, and it's like, oh, that makes perfect sense. Like, why has that not been a thing before? I always mispronounce this name. So I'm not even going to try to, I forget the name of the faction. Like, I either say it wrong or I butcher it in some ways. It's a dwarf, steampunk dwarf pirate. And I think the paint job works really well on this one. Like the colors they chose, especially. It's a cool model. It would be if the Witch Hunter is tier 1, then so far Brand of Tarth would be like a tier 2 or 2.5. This would clearly be a tier 2, or maybe like a 1.5, 1.5. It's close to 1, not quite 1. This is just a good classic Elven, Sylvaneth maybe model. It's just a really good, not bad. I always wonder what they're thinking. This goes back to why didn't they put the hammer in the right hand coming down and the sword going up, right? This happened with, was it Ragnar, the Space Wolf champion? Blackbane? Does that sound right? Ragnar Blackbane? I apologize if I got that wrong. I should know that. I will know that name immediately after I stop recording this video. But that being said, I could stop and pause and edit this portion out. Where's the freshness in that? The spontaneity is diminished, even though this is a recording. My point being is, when you jump off of things, how does your foot get on the other side of the thing that you're jumping off of to get that kind of leverage? That's the fundamental problem I have with most of these artistically arranged bases where a figure's jumping off of a thing. In order to be on that side of the element, I think it's like you almost have to be knocked backwards, land on that side, and then push off it. Sure, but it looks like she's running backwards and then looking back to shoot, which adds another layer of complexity. I know this is such a nerd boy thing to say, but if you're running through the forest and there's like this broken sculpture wall piece just sitting on the forest floor, right? and you're running and you're ducking and dodging and juking and jiving, whatever. You're running through the forest and you're jumping over stuff, and then you're gonna look backwards to shoot. Your foot's probably, I don't know how do you leap up and then somehow kick. I just feel like I get you would push off from that, but it just seems, I think the solution is try to avoid overly angled bases to jump off of. That makes it problematic of how did you get on that side of the thing you're jumping off of? It looks like you have all this forward momentum. I don't know, but it feels like in order to get to that side of that angle of that object, you would have almost gotten pushed backwards when you're clearly running forward. I really overanalyze these particular elements of their bases, but they put so much time and effort, I think, into sculpting these things, and it's an active decision, right? They could just leave this up to the hobbyist to put the model on a base however we want to, but they go out of their way to craft. They've even have memes now where like your your base rock, if you will, has its own personality, stats, and everything in the game. So if they're going to go to the effort of designing and sculpting these things to be attached to the model, I think you gotta the believability needs to be sorted out a little bit more. Kind of like you don't slam to the ground doing the superheroic landing, you know, with the bladed end going into the ground versus a massive hammer. It's shattering the rock. It's really hard for a sword to break rock. Hammer, not hard at all. You jump over a rock. Do you jump on the side that's facing you, or do you somehow pivot your foot over the thing while you're running, looking the other direction? Moving on. This guy, if I can remove the fact that he reminds me of the main character, Janus, or whatever his name was, from Blackstone Fortress, if I can like remove that from my memory, then this guy is amazing. But because this guy is like the fantasy version of the guy from the 40K version of the Blackstone Fortress version of Warhammer Quest, then I'm like, God, this feels like the same model. Now that being said, who cares? This is a cool sculpt. This is encroaching on, for me, tier 1. It's definitely a tier 2. It's probably a tier 1.5. I feel like, again, it's that if you just rotate this model slightly, then it has more personality, more character, more depth. But it's that one pose where it just happened to flatten everything out, and it loses something because of that. It's almost like they want to show the viewer the face more, because naturally we want to try to make eye contact with whatever human formed thing, whether it's a painting or a sculpture. We want to make that kind of eye contact. That's just like part of our biology, I guess. So I get why they pose these models sometimes the way they do. But I think as a hobbyist, as a miniature painter, we want to see more of the overall form. So I think they're not going to listen to me. What am I talking about? But if they were, that would be my suggestion. All right, so this guy, he might step on his beard every now and then. Other than that, pretty cool model. I applaud GW for when they make a commitment to a design aesthetic, they commit. And I feel like that beard was a commitment, clearly. Other than that, it's just okay. Again, I have a feeling there's a lot more going on with this model if we could see the side or back of him, but we can't. The other thing I can't tell is that his face or is that a mask? And it's cut out like Phantom of the Opera style. I almost feel like it's Phantom of the Opera style, like mask, like that's not really his face. Could be wrong. When the pupils are not visible, it also makes me think it's probably a mask. Guess we'll find out. When they did the silhouette previews, I out of all the previous silhouettes, I felt like I kind of predicted what I thought each one would be. I missed this one for sure. I did not think this was going to be for Curse City. I definitely didn't think it was going to be like a Stormcast related, like mage or cleric type figure. So that's cool. Definitely did not see this one coming. It's a very cool design. Like I really like it. It has a little bit of an Amidala Star Wars prequel vibe. I'm okay with that. It's not her fault the movie wasn't that great. Or is it? Oh, sorry guys, I got to come back just a little bit. Tier 3, maybe 2.5. All right, the Amidala stunt double. She's you know what? She's probably a 2 or a 1.5 as well. I mean, it's a really good design. It's really interesting. It's really cool. Okay, so if there was a contender for the throne, as far as the tier 1 designs go, this corpse eating ogre is bonkers. Like this again, this is the when you think maybe GW lost it and they just don't want to ever do a classic GW design, I feel the Wight King, the skeleton on the horse that we saw earlier, that was classic GW. This ogre, I feel like, is classic GW. Even though they normally don't do ogres that look like this feels like it would be a GW ogre. Like it's so good. So good. So I think this is fair to say this is a tier 1. For sure a tier 1. At worst tier 1.5. But so yeah, it's amazing. Now, when we first saw the preview and I was trying to guess the models, I actually thought there'd be more Sylvaneth looking models. It turns out that those were some of the half vampire or half bat, half, I guess, wolf, or half vampire, half werewolf models, not Sylvaneth elves. The other one, I wasn't sure if this was going to be an ogre that we saw, or if it was just a weird way they did the foreshortening and maybe it was a dwarf. Well, it was clearly an ogre. Just it was difficult to tell in those not silhouettes, but the drawings that we saw a few weeks back. You weren't sure how close to the foreground the model was, but it looked like it could have been an ogre just because of the proportions, or a dwarf. But I'm happy that it's an ogre. It's one of the best ogres I think GW's ever done. Just a classic ogre. I do like the ogre tyrant. And was it the Icebrow Hunter is pretty cool. And I guess the ogre for Beast Grey. But I digress. This is their best ogre. All right, we're moving on. We're back to Brianna. Okay. Those were the good guys. Now let's go ahead and look at, I guess, just some of the varmints, if you will. So we got bats. These are well done bats. This, I don't know what's going on here, but we're going to say that's fine. It's totally normal. He doesn't have like 4 eyes and all wings and no body. No, I'm not saying that way. It's a totally normal shaped bat. What's funny is, and we'll see it here in a bit, like some of the other vampire creatures feel like they don't have big enough wings, or their wings weren't included in their design. And these guys, they hoarded all the wings. Like they're literally all wing. They're not, there's no bodies. Screw that noise. We're just wings. So that's what they got. Lots of wings. And I guess a head, sure. You know, for plague rats, these are, I don't know why. I think these are really well done. I also like the fact that there's so many fantasy games that require like just really well done plague rats. Yeah, these are perfect for all the above. You know, I'm going to probably, my comments will kind of mirror what other people said about these designs. These are undead ogres. They look great, so zombie ogres. But because they're painted green, the skin is painted green, they look like undead orcs, not undead ogres. That's all. Otherwise, I like them a lot. Skeletons, man. I think these are great. Clearly, this villain has a little bit of a Mongolian flair to their design aesthetic. Maybe Eastern European. Cool. Makes sense. The whole Romania, Count Dracula vibe. Or Transylvania. I can't believe I said Romania. Basically the same location. Yeah, these look great. I know people talked about, well, why does the why do the clothing remnants flow one direction on some and the other direction on the other? They should be consistently the same. Well, sure. Or if they're evenly, some blow to the left, some blow to the right, maybe you split your army in that way. And that way, whatever wind or force is coming through, it's shooting it off to both sides. Just a thought. Yeah, I dig these. These look like the skeleton that's in was it Conan the Barbarian, the very first Conan movie with Arnold, in like 1980. Like where he gets his sword, the tomb of whatever king. He's like sitting there in his sword, holding on to the sword, and the sword like falls and he grabs it and breaks all the rust off. Anyways, the aesthetic of these kind of feels like that skeleton king that was in the crypt that Arnold found. I mean Conan, of course. Again, when GW commits to a thing, they're all in. They're all in, and then they take their friend stuff and go all in with their friend stuff. You can't just have normal zombies. No, 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 no. You will not be using these for your Walking Dead games or any other zombie games. Nope. These are exclusively for Curse City zombies. How dare you for thinking otherwise? But I really like them. They make no sense. I know some people said, well, normally when you see a zombie and they have their tomb, it's like strapped to their back like a backpack. Sure. But I also kind of like the fact that they were like quickly like put into a really crappy coffin. And they just popped out of the ground with part of the coffin stuck to their back. And not that the tombstone would normally be on top of the coffin. I get maybe back then or whenever these were done, that's how it was, but that's how they did it. So yeah, I think and they clearly weren't buried 6 feet under. They were literally build a hole deep enough to put the coffin in, spread a little bit of dirt over the top of it, plant the tombstone. I shouldn't say plant, set the tombstone on top of of the coffin and have a nice day. That's how that happens. That's how that works. Now, things like spikes that went through the coffin or tree limbs growing through. I mean, again, it works because they committed to all these other aspects that are kind of like over the top. But I really like it. I like that it's different. I like everything about these goofy zombies. Yeah, they cut some corners in the fact that I think so they show us 10 zombies, but I think there's only 5 unique sculpts for the body. I think that's 5. But they have like 10 different heads. Or maybe not. It might just be 5 and 5 and they just switch some of the heads around on different bodies. Because like this one, this female zombie with like the head wrap, her body, and this one is actually this body here that's the blonde one. And the blonde one is over here, but she is using the body that was the head wrap one. So it looks like it may not even be different. Like it may not be 10 different heads. It may be 5 bodies, 5 heads, 2 sets of each for 10 total zombies that you can kind of arrange however you want. They did similar things with, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but like the Blood Bowl, the orc team, the black orc team, which I think was kind of unfair. The black orcs and the goblins all got like multiple heads for their bodies, at least 2. But the humans didn't. The Imperial nobles kind of got like, you got stuck with 1 head type. Whatever. And we're back to the all wing, no body bats. All right, so those were the critters. Now the main baddie. So this is Radikar the Wolf. Now apparently he's a vampire ogre. This is where it slips a little for me with this Curse City release. The style of some of these models don't look consistent with some of the other model designs. Like the sculpting style is different. I don't know, but this ogre, for example, the style of this ogre has elements of like classic GW ogre, but also some cool new stuff going on. This doesn't even feel like a GW model to me. I don't know what's going on here. He doesn't have really the giant face like an ogre would normally have. He might be a physically big model, but doesn't have the ogre proportion, like this giant melon of a face. I don't know if it's because of this wolf cap disguises that or obscures it in some way, but it seems like the main baddie Radikar here, and where are they here? These zombie orcs, excuse me, they're not orcs, ogres. These zombie ogres look to be different than the hero or the hero ogre. They seem to be somewhat styled different. And yet these also feel somewhat styled different than this apparent ogre. I don't know. That's my only real complaint is there seems to be a little bit of a inconsistency with some of this line. This guy, so I guess if I had I didn't do the tiers on the critters. They're not the heroes, doesn't matter. For what's supposed to be the main villain, if I were to write down everything that this model has going on for it, it should be like a tier 1, at worst a tier 2. But for me, it's like a tier 4, 3 or a 4. It's off in a lot of ways. It's almost like it's not fully sculpted yet. Like there's the fur's thicker, unrefined. It's not as detailed in certain areas. It feels like they like when you work three-dimensionally, especially if you're like carving a sculpture, you kind of block in the shapes, or if you're drawing, you're blocking in the shapes, and then you kind of work into the details and refine it more. I feel like this didn't get refined. Now, maybe part of it's just the paint job, but it's all sorts of, it feels very simplified in overall form. Something's off with it. Like, I don't know if it was rushed. They scrapped the previous design and this was quickly done just to meet a deadline. It's just off. This guy doesn't have that problem. And maybe he did, but it seems like they covered themselves on this one. I think it's got some weird painting decisions, like the fingers look like this whole hand is just all fingers. But I think that's just the paint job. The hand going around the staff or cane. It's close. Other than that, I there's a lot of cool stuff going on with that model. It's a tier probably 2. It's almost too much stuff. Cool skeleton warrior, yo. No real complaints. It's consistent with the other skeletons. It feels like a GW skeleton in general. That kind of angular paint style where the edges are really defined. It works fine. It works actually really good for this model, so cool. Now, all the complaints I had about the main baddie in his human form, I believe this is meant to be his monster form. It's a Vargolf, I believe. It's a new sculpt for the Vargolf vampire model, which is ironic because I just bought the old sculpt that's been around for like 20 years for Warcry. And then this comes out. So I'd much rather have this as my Vargolf. But I feel like this has the details I would expect like the lead baddie to have. Not, again, I don't know what's going on here. And if he's supposed to be pre-transformation to this, something happened. Something really happened unexpectedly, I think, with this model. It's off in so many ways, but this is awesome. No doubt. And then we saw this Gravekeeper kind of dude. Very bizarre, but super cool. I've talked about this model a lot. This is a tier 1 for me. It almost doesn't feel like a GW model. It feels like it's out of like the name escapes me, but like out of Pan's, I think it's Pan's Labyrinth and Del Toro kind of vibe from like Hellboy. I tend to agree. If you saw again Vince this weekend, his reaction, along with I think he had John and Scott, Sam, and Tom, of course, were on that video. They all had their own opinion on these werewolf slash vampire models. I feel like they made them different just to be different, because sometimes GW likes to do that. Kind of like what they did with the high elves. So just having like high elves, they're Lumineth elves, are this kind of weird hybrid between traditional high elves and something that's just uniquely GW. It might be the paint style doesn't quite work for these, but this hybrid of werewolf and vampire, that was kind of like the main thing they were going for. What was that? There was that vampire movie in the late 90s, early 2000s, I think it was, that had like Kate Beckinsale in it. Underworld, I believe was what it was called, where the pinnacle of whatever was a combination of werewolf and vampire, and that was, I mean, that's what these kind of are, but I feel like Underworlds did it better. The contrast between the fur and the hair and the skin, it just seems too much. They committed to it. It's a good attempt. Having all this hair in the crotch area just seems really funny. I get why you would do that to cover all the naughty bits in a way, but it also just makes it even like worse. We got to introduce you to like manscaping, yo. Man, that's oof. There's way too much material here for bad puns, bad jokes. But hey, when your feet are clearly animal claws or paws, you get toenails. But if you're a normal human or orc, apparently you don't get toenails. So hey, you win some, you lose some. Hey guys, you got nails. I like this pose. I think if you just like say screw it, they're gonna be painted like all kind of like a black or dark brown fur. It kind of works. Maybe it fades to more of a pallety, sickly skin tone around the head, or kind of how they do with the bloody eyes. But I don't think you can have their bodies mostly white. It's off. Something about it's off. Okay. So this is what's in the box. We're still going to come back to the video. You got your 8 heroes, 42 hostiles. That's a lot of hostiles. 10 objective markers. What's cool is we didn't see the sculpts for these objective markers, but they look pretty good. I'm not sure if it's just always these 2 and they made 2 of each to have 10 total, or if there's 10 unique ones. Funky dice. Okay. Boards and tiles. You have these cards. Some folks talked about there might be cards for Warcry in here, as well as like Age of Sigmar. Maybe. I'm not super familiar. They might have cards for Age of Sigmar, but I hope they have cards for Warcry. You get an actual book. Now in the book, the Witch Hunter is the main character, and that makes sense. What's really interesting, I don't recall this model in the background. He's got the long beard, but so is that this character? He's got the mask on? Maybe. And the Brianna Tarth character looks more like a female warrior. Just the shape of the armor kind of lends to that. Let's watch the video. Turn it down just a bit. Yeah, all these figures have so much more going for them when you can see them fully in the round, for sure. But I don't know, this, the main bad guy, it's a bummer. It feels like they did not give him the attention he deserved. It's very cool looking game. I typically get the Warhammer Quest stuff, so I don't foresee not getting this, but the but part would be its price point. I believe Blackstone Fortress was 160 or 150. The Silver Quest stuff was all around 150. I would be cool if this was in the 150 range. I have a feeling it's going to be closer to the 2 to possibly 300 range. 42 hostile models. There's 10 objective markers. That's a whole lot more plastic than what was in any of the other. Well, yeah, for sure it's more than what was in Blackstone Fortress, I believe. and I want to say definitely more than what was in the the issue with the Silver Quest stuff, it there were like a lot of like little critter models in that too, whether they were like lesser demons or Skaven or little like goblin type stuff. So maybe you could argue they had 40 to 50 some models in those box sets as well. But you also get a rule book, a quest book. There is the War Scroll books. That's going to be your War Scrolls for Age of Sigmar. So these characters are going to be in Age of Sigmar. They don't say anything about Warcry, so arguably nothing in there. Not sure what the secret envelope holds. If it says alongside the box set comes, okay, but I don't think it's inside, it's alongside. So this is separate. I would not be surprised if it's more than 200. I would not be surprised if it's almost or is 300. I hate the fact that could be the case. The more I look at this, the more I've thought about it, because I wanted to think about it for a day or two over the weekend before I had my own reaction to it and give you my thoughts on this set in particular. Because there's some inconsistency in the models, especially with the villain and those half vampire, half werewolf sculpts. I don't know what's going on there. I hope this isn't much more than 150. I think it's just barely 150 or 160. I can see with current global craziness going on and inflation, I could see an argument made for like a 200 price point, but anything more than 200, I'll have to seriously question if I get it. Unless there's confirmation that the only way you can get the rules for these characters for Warcry is to get the box, then I could see that be the case to get it if you're into Warcry. Obviously, if you're in the Age of Sigmar, it looks like you got your War Scrolls, so there could be an argument for that. I think they led so strong with previewing the Witch Hunter model and the Gravekeeper model. Everything after that kind of slid downwards, except for the Ogre, arguably. So I was like here on my excitement, and now I'm like maybe here or here, somewhere in there. Yeah, as long as it's not over $300, I'll probably get it. There's also speculation this thing could sell out. I guess that's a possibility, but you can still get Blackstone Fortress. Heck, you can still get Silver Quest in some hobby stores or online. So probably will be around for a while. We'll find out. All right, so we're almost done with all the previews for the preview. So we have another like champion model they're doing a sneak peek on, that the Wight King, the Gardus, and the whatever his name was, the Night Lord, Night Haunt champion. We got to see the full figure. This guy, we don't get to see the full figure. But we'll take a look at his video.
I was their first son. The prince.
The original Demon Prince, as I understand it. We don't get to see his face.
Of kings.
See his body part.
Cursed to crown my
Decoration.
inferiors.
His abs.
My vengeance.
Some dead slave of darkness dude on the ground. Pull my finger. Boom! Don't pull the finger. Don't do it. The first prince. Oh man. Yeah, you pull the finger, he explodes. Not cool. So yeah, one heck of a preview. So this is likely going to be like your 20th reaction video to this preview by the time you see this, but that's okay. This one's mine. And I'm not sure if that's saying anything either, but a lot of cool stuff. If you're into Lumineth, huge release. Of course, Curse City that we just spent a lot of time on. Curse City, I think, looks great. It's not perfect, but it looks great. And then some of these champion models, these heroes, if you will. I'm so bummed they didn't reverse these weapons, but that's fine. It's salvageable. It'll be fine. We'll swap the weapons around. We'll have a cool lightning strike element going through the lightning rod looking sword, channeling into the hammer, and everything will be right in the world. Night, this Night Lord, the Wight King. Yeah, he's a flawless victory. And Mob of the Mork. Mob of Mork and Mindy, maybe. These are pretty cool. Again, no toenails. That's fine. Whatever. Yeah, great sculpts. New starter set for Warhammer Underworlds. All right, yeah. So what did you guys all think? Were you happy with this release? Were there things you were disappointed in? Did you think there was some general consistency issues in Curse City? Did you have the same issue I had with Gardus with the sword and hammer? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And so with that said, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care. Be safe. Have a great day. I'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.